And now it's Boomer Life. Lifestyle ideas designed to make your life more engaging, meaningful, and complete. Celebrating the baby boomer generation. This is Boomer Life.
Welcome to Boomer Life on AM 650. My name is Simone Grewal. On Boomer Life today, we're talking about addiction. If you or someone you know is struggling with addiction or dependency issues, we have in studio today people who can help. Our guests today are from LDR Holistic Wellness Center. Joining us again is John Patterson, who is the Director of Human Relations. Welcome back.
Thanks, Simone.
We also have Carl Pauls, who is the Program Director, and Claire Succi, who is a clinical counselor. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Now, in today's 1 hour show, we're going to explore the topic is the faces of addiction and recovery. And we're going to go through the different challenges of high and low bottom alcoholics and addicts. We'll talk a little bit about Claire's story. Carl will also share his story with us. And then we'll talk about addiction is a disease and recovery and how that's a choice. Now, let's start off with a little background first, John, about LDR Holistic Addiction Wellness Center.
Thanks, Simone. So LDR has been in existence for a little over 7 years, and its mandate is really to build on the individual gratitude of people in recovery, to carry that message to other people who are struggling and attempting to achieve that recovery themselves. So everybody who works for LDR has their own personal recovery story, as well as our professional backgrounds. And I thought it important, having in the preceding 3 shows, talked about some of the myths of addiction and recovery, and then looked at the families and how they're impacted, and then talked about the intervention. That we brought this down from a more sort of classical discussion and started to put some faces to this, no pun intended. If there's one thing that all of us at LDR have come to realize, is that absolutely everybody, from the lowest of the lows to the highest of the highs, in terms of competency, skill set, professional abilities, education, money, all of upbringing, background, every one of these people can be impacted by addiction, in the same way that any of those people could become a diabetic or have a heart disease. So part of what I thought and we wanted to talk about today was how can we share some of the human side of both the bewildering confusion that every one of us in our own private way goes through in grappling with, am I an addict or an alcoholic? Is this truly beyond my control? Is there nothing that I can do? And then coming to that place of realizing I can't do this alone, and I need help. And when that question surfaces, the next question is, where do I get help? And so LDR is very determined that it stays small, that it stay very personalized, because we know how difficult that challenge can be for the individual, not only in terms of the shared characteristics that all addicts and alcoholics have in common, but also the individual challenges. And we're really grateful and feel blessed that everybody who's a part of LDR has their own story, and therefore can bring some really powerful insights that can help to meet these people at the human level, and then the professional competencies to help them at the clinical level.
So, John, how long have you been with the Wellness Center for?
So I've been with the Wellness Center in a variety of capacities for about 6 years. I started in my current role after completing a master's degree in leadership, which is really specializes in how individuals and groups change and cope with change. And as you can imagine, there's a pretty substantial change that has to take place in a person's self-identity when they go from denying they have a problem and absolutely believing they can still control it to this terrible, frightening realization that nothing of their own effort or willpower or character or intellect can do is going to give them the solution that they're seeking. And then, moving into recovery and all that entails.
Now, we also have Carl Pauls, who's the program director at LDR Holistic Wellness Center with us, as well as Claire Succi, who's the clinical counselor. And we're going to get into their background a little later on what brought them to the center. Starting with kind of today's topic, what are the different challenges of high and low bottom alcoholics and addicts?
And so what's really interesting about addiction, as I talked about briefly earlier, is this idea that addiction doesn't discriminate on the basis of talent or ability. And so for a person who comes from a very high functioning background, who may have all manner of successes as defined by the outside world in terms of their ability to work and be professional and be competent and do all of those things, those individuals have a real challenge with the idea of, how can I be an alcoholic? Because look at my life. I've got what is defined by the outside world as success. I have overcome these obstacles. I have accomplished these goals. I can't be an alcoholic. And what they're struggling with is an error in perception, a misunderstanding of the nature of what addiction is. And in our first show, when we talked about the myths of addiction, just to remind those who didn't hear that, we have this idea that addiction is somehow a moral failing, a lack of character, something that happens to other people who had some kind of unfortunate background. I mean, and you can wrap it in their religious versions of what this means.
But it can really happen to anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the things that people often miss when they're considering whether or not someone has quote unquote hit bottom is that loss isn't always to do with material things. Like, when we think of a bottom, sometimes we think of, losing your house and your car and your family and your job and things like that. But there are a lot of people who struggle with alcoholism or addiction and who still have managed to maintain those things, but what they're experiencing is a devastating emotional bottom, feeling of not wanting to live anymore and having all of these things that we would typically recognize as success, and yet feeling completely empty and hopeless. And I think it's helpful sometimes for people to realize that that is a bottom as well. And a lot of people are able to find help when they're in that place before they even need to lose their house and their car and their relationships and so on.
And sometimes it's finding that line. We've talked about this in previous shows. It's you see society, it's the end of the work week, you want to go out with some friends, you're having some drinks, it's summer now, it's the time to be social and have that. So in the mind of an addict, it might be a case where they think, yeah, all my friends are doing this, I'm just doing the same thing. But when is that line crossed? When would you know that, no, what I'm doing is not normal?
Yeah, it's interesting often in our work, and John and Claire see it when our patients come in, how deluded they are as to where they really are, and they don't even realize that they've hit bottom. But what's most interesting that I found in my work is the family has already hit bottom. You see, the family's hit bottom, and they don't know what to do anymore. And our patients don't have to hit bottom anymore. With the evolution of treatment in the last 30, 40 years, we've been able to raise that bottom. And we've been able to help families. And LDR does interventions, and where we can help families to bring their loved one to that place where they have that moment of clarity and say, yes, I want help.
If you're just joining us, this is Boomer Life on AM 650. Our guests in studio are from LDR Holistic Wellness Center. We have John Patterson, who's the Director of Human Relations. Carl Pauls is the Program Director, and Claire Succi is a clinical counselor. We're talking about the faces of addiction and recovery. And Carl, you just mentioned, a lot of times it's the family who's hit rock bottom. In most cases, is it the family coming to seek the support first, or do you often have an addict coming to seek that help because they've come to some kind of a realization?
They often have that moment of clarity where everything looks hopeless. What am I going to do? I've tried everything else and it's not working. Or the family doesn't know what to do anymore. They will seek help. So we see both. The most important thing is when that addict has that moment of clarity, you have a narrow window where they say, okay, I need help, because they will suddenly leave that window. They'll suddenly get back to that place where, you know what, I can manage this again.
Mm-hmm. Now, there's a comment here that says arrogance of success versus humility of surrendering. What does that mean?
So if I believe that addiction is somehow evidence of my character, and I have built a persona of power and success and competency, in order for me to entertain the idea that I may be an addict and my life may be spiraling out of control, I am then confronted with an identity crisis of no small proportions.
Mm-hmm.
It may be that the particular path that I have taken has required me to exude tremendous confidence or tremendous. Imagine a surgeon, imagine an airline pilot, imagine a judge, imagine people in positions of responsibility around children. So there's a very powerful incentive to say, I can't be this because I couldn't be these other things and be this. And again, it comes back to breaking down the misunderstanding. So when, Carl talks about this raising the bottom, I mean, what's raising the bottom and what's allowing people to come in here earlier and earlier in their addiction cycle is that we are breaking the misunderstanding of what addiction really is. And so as we begin to explore with people the fact that addiction is a disease, it is a disease that has been studied for decades. It is pretty clearly understood now.
Mm-hmm.
It has very specific symptoms and characteristics that absolutely can be treated, so that while there is no cure any more than there is a cure for diabetes, there is a very consistent approach that will allow us to permanently arrest those conditions and maintain a sober lifestyle, one day at a time for the rest of our life.
Now, you mentioned people, of course, addiction can happen to anyone in all walks of life. People in powerful positions, you said there are judges or people who work with children. It's a huge burden to have on your shoulders, even to know that this is something you need to get help for, but how will it look? And even for family members, there can be that sense of pride. We're a family unit, we're strong. Nope, none of us are weak. And it's not something that it is an illness, so it's not something you should think that this cannot be discussed outside the family. But getting that help can really take that weight off your shoulders if you are the addict or if you are someone in the family who's trying to get that help.
Absolutely, Simone. Getting people to a place where they can loosen their grip on the shame and the guilt by realizing that this isn't the behavior of addicts and alcoholics can be embarrassing, no doubt about it. And if we judge a person by what they do in active addiction, then that explains where a lot of the condemnation and the guilt and shame comes from. And yet, through understanding that the nature of the addict's behavior is not the addict, it is the addiction. And so this is not who this person is. These are the symptoms of what happens when active addiction is in full-blown control. And yet by correcting and adjusting for those symptoms, by creating stability in their life, by giving them the tools to secure sobriety, all those symptoms go away.
Mm-hmm.
And what they're replaced with is a person with incredible potential.
If you're just joining us, this is Boomer Life on AM 650. My name is Simone Graywall. If you or someone you know is struggling with addiction or dependency issues, we have in studio today people who can help, the experts. They are here from LDR Holistic Wellness Center. We have John Patterson, the Director of Human Relations, Carl Pauls, who is the Program Director, and Claire Succi, who is a clinical counselor. Online, holisticdrugrehab.org. Stay with us. When we come back, we're going to hear a little more from Claire and hear about her personal story right here on AM 650.
It's all about the baby boomer lifestyle. Boomer Life on AM 650.